A new health care bill. House Republicans attempt, once again, to repeal and replace Obamacare. May Day marches. Why working conditions aren't the only thing activists are protesting. The Pope in Egypt. Thousands attend Mass as the Holy Father wraps up his historic visit. And a helping hand. We'll introduce you to a Michigan priest we met in Iraq who moved there to help persecuted Christians. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, May 1st, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump promises a GOP health care bill will lower premiums and protect people with pre-existing conditions. It comes as lawmakers unveil a $1 trillion plus spending bill to avoid a government shutdown. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi kicks off our coverage. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Healthcare negotiations will be a challenge, but the deal reached yesterday on the spending bill could be a good sign. The White House is hopeful action could come soon on the health bill, and President Trump is selling it to the nation.
We will repeal and replace Obamacare. You watch.
On his 100th day in office, President Trump repeated his campaign promise in Pennsylvania.
We're going to get the premiums down. We're going to get the deductibles way down.
He's also promising the health care plan is on its way. Republicans promise to use the bill to strip Planned Parenthood of Medicaid funds. But for now, the abortion provider's federal funding will be preserved in another bill. The $1.1 trillion spending bill that will keep the government open through September. Conservative lawmakers are not happy about that.
Money goes to Planned Parenthood, as you said. Money continues to go to sanctuary cities, but no money for the border wall. I think you're going to see a lot of conservatives be against this plan this week.
Susan B. Anthony List, a pro-life lobby group, calls the Planned Parenthood funding incredibly disappointing. But Trump wins a $15 billion payment on his request to strengthen the military. That includes money for 74 new fighter jets and 13 new Navy ships. The catch-all spending bill would be the first major piece of bipartisan legislation to advance during Trump's short time in the White House. The House is expected to vote on the spending bill Wednesday. It will also include money for D.C.'s school voucher program that helps students here attend Catholic and other private schools. The White House Speaker Ryan, Democratic leader Chuck Schumer praised the bill, calling it a good agreement for the American people. Lauren?
What are you hearing, Jason, about a possible health care bill?
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer says they're not there yet on the votes, but getting closer and closer every day.
All right, Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. Thousands of activists across the country are rallying for May Day, also known as International Workers' Day. This year, many marchers are protesting President Trump's efforts to crack down on illegal immigration. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us from the White House. Good evening, Wyatt.
Lauren, good evening. President Trump isn't using the term May Day. He's declared this Loyalty Day, a long-standing tradition highlighting individual liberties, limited government, and human dignity. But protesters say human dignity is exactly what they're standing up for.
Thousands gather in the nation's capital and across the country for strikes, boycotts, and marches. The goal? To draw attention to the plight of illegal immigrants.
The Franciscan Action Network stands with immigrants. We stand with workers, just as the Catholic Church does.
Jason Miller, one of those marching today, is with the Franciscan Action Network, a grassroots organization inspired by the teachings of St. Francis.
All this anti-immigrant rhetoric, all this anti-refugee rhetoric, it's really unchristian.
Miller cites the president's recent speech to the NRA, where he fired up the crowd.
We need a wall. We'll build the wall. Don't even think about it.
But President Trump's strategy seems to be working. In the same speech, the president said illegal immigration on the southern border is down 73%.
Never happened before.
The Trump administration is stepping up enforcement of U.S. immigration law. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is vowing to crack down on violent criminals, like MS-13, a gang originating in El Salvador with a big presence in the U.S. Some experts say Americans who believe in enforcing the law are not anti-immigrant.
Too many today are trying to extinguish the line between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And they try to say that those who want our laws enforced against illegal immigrants are somehow against immigration. That is, of course, not true.
And we want to remind viewers what the Catholic Church teaches about immigration. The Catechism says we must welcome immigrants, but we also have the right to secure our borders for the common good. So this is a complex debate balancing both justice and mercy. Lauren?
Wyatt, is this the first time a president has called for a loyalty day like this?
No, Lauren. Actually, Loyalty Day goes back as far as Dwight Eisenhower. It began as a response to the communist revolution in Russia, but President Trump is putting his own stamp on it, suggesting Americans mark the day by flying flags over government buildings and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee at the White House. Thank you, Wyatt. And all around the world, police arrest hundreds of people after May Day protests turn violent. A few hundred protesters in Paris threw bottle bombs and other objects at police. They responded with tear gas. Cubans celebrated largest political event as President Raul Castro looked on. And in Russia, activists took to the streets against a decision to return one of St. Petersburg's most famous landmarks to the Orthodox Church. President Trump invites a controversial leader to the White House. Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte has been critical of the Pope and President Obama. But President Trump is seeking common ground with him over the issue of North Korea. The White House did not provide details on when Duterte would visit, but says in a statement that the president is looking forward to his Philippines trip in November. Pope Francis appeals to leaders of Venezuela for peace after weeks of political turmoil. Yesterday at the Vatican, the Holy Father called for an end to violence and for the respect of human rights. Anti-government protests have gone on for weeks, with the country facing a deep economic crisis. Nearly 30 people have died. Pope Francis addresses the media while traveling back to Italy from Egypt. He hit a wide range of topics, from the migrant crisis in Europe to tensions in North Korea.
A pezzi, ma I pezzi sono allargati anche si sono concentrati.
The Holy Father warned a good part of humanity will be destroyed if tensions with North Korea escalate. He called for diplomacy and help from the United Nations. Francis was also asked about a meeting with President Trump in May. The Holy Father said while no official request for a meeting has been received, he welcomes every head of state who requests an audience. While in Egypt, Pope Francis preached tolerance between Muslims and Christians and showed solidarity with the country's persecuted Coptic Christians. Francis engaged the crowd Saturday with waves and smiles as he celebrated Mass with 15,000 people outside of Cairo. During his homily, the Holy Father urged the faithful to be good and merciful to their fellow Egyptians. He says the only fanaticism believers can have is that of charity. Security was tight following a pair of bombings on Palm Sunday that killed dozens of Christians in the country. And joining us now is Professor Robert Destro, director of the Catholic University of America's Interdisciplinary Program in Law and Religion. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Tell us how important is the Pope's visit? Was it?
Pope's visit is very important. I mean, going to Al-Azhar, which is basically the Vatican of Sunni Islam, is a wonderful opening. They have been annoyed with the papacy since Benedict's Regensburg speech. So this was a very important trip for the Pope.
He doesn't shy away from controversy now, does he?
This
Pope.
And
with the Coptic Orthodox Pope, Tawadros II, I think they signed a pledge saying that the faithful who switch churches don't have to be rebaptized. Why is that significant?
That's significant because it recognizes that the Copts are Christians, and that if we all read the same Bible, which we do, we know that there's a certain formula for baptism. If it's done that way, then you don't need to redo. You don't need a redo.
Right. When they were there, well, since December, 75 people have been killed. Right. And when the Pope was there, he stood with El-Sisi, President El-Sisi, and El-Sisi said, look, I am determined right now to get rid of ISIS. I stand shoulder to shoulder with you. And he says that Islam does not command the killing of the innocent. Help us understand the ideology of Egypt that perpetuates this type of violence?
Well, let me make a slight correction. It's not the ideology of Egypt. Egypt and the Christian community have had very good relations for years. It's really the Muslim Brotherhood, Salafi, Jihadi movement that's coming out of Saudi Arabia that's causing the problem. And they basically have put themselves in the place of God themselves by saying, look, the Quran says specifically you don't kill innocent people. So where does ISIS get this idea? Well, it comes from this idea in Saudi Arabia, largely coming out of the Saudi madrasas, that basically says you can kill heretics. So they go after the Shia, they go after the Yazidis, and they go after the Christians.
Sure. The Pope urged that Egypt's imams teach their students to reject violence in God's name and preach peace and work on dialogue and reconciliation, not to instigate conflict. On a practical level, how is that going to work?
Well, it's going to work if you can get into those pulpits on Friday morning. And more importantly, I would suggest that it's going to help if they stop sending their graduate students to madrasas in Saudi Arabia. I mean, the Indonesians have exactly the same problem. You've got this ideology that's seeping out of the Gulf states, and it's being financed by the Gulf states. So, you know, if you can actually get to the formation, it's proper formation, just like we Catholics think.
It seems like you're putting a lot of the, shall I say, blame on Saudi Arabia. That's not something we hear very often.
No, you don't. But this is one of those unspoken things. There's a name for this. It's called it's called Salafi jihadis, and basically this is what is the ideology driving ISIS. You know, and their idea of a caliphate is to impose their own narrow view of Sharia law on everybody.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Robert Destro, Director of the Catholic University of America's Interdisciplinary Program on both law and religion.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Coming up, the president's top pro-life advisor stops by to tell us about a big win for the movement. And in her own words,
that's my job to grab that photo.
President Trump's chief White House photographer opens up about covering the most powerful man in the world. St. Joseph has 2 feast days each year, one on March 19th and today, May 1st. It's the feast of Joseph the Worker. Joseph was the husband of Mary and a carpenter. Pope Pius XII started today's feast day in 1955. Pope Francis has a deep devotion to St. Joseph and even keeps a statue of a sleeping Joseph in his room and says that he often writes down his prayers and sets them under the statue. And in New York City, St. Joseph's Chapel, which sheltered first responders on 9/11, could be forced to close its doors. The chapel occupies the ground floor of an apartment complex less than 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center. On 9/11, emergency workers used the chapel as a command center. 3 years ago, rent jumped from $80,000 to $264,000 per year. Last year, the collections for the chapel didn't make it. They only came in at $164,000. The Archdiocese of New York says it's exhausting every option it has to keep that chapel open. President Trump picks a pro-life leader for a top post at the Department of Health and Human Services. We first reported last week that this woman, Charmaine Yost, the former president of Americans United for Life, was named Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs at HHS. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, joins us now. Well, this is a big win for the pro-life movement. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. No kidding, Charmaine is the best. Great colleague, great friend, completely reliable and a visionary. She really is.
What do you think that she will be doing? It's interesting to me that she is taking over the job from an Obama administration appointee who is now going to Planned Parenthood?
No kidding. That just shows the whole night and day situation,
right?
A microcosm of everything going on in the administration right now. She'll be the spokesman for the president at HHS, which is where so many of the things that we care about are happening right now, including family planning, which means Planned Parenthood, the Hyde Amendment. There are also conscience issues. So much is right there in terms of what's important.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the ideological shift that we're seeing. I know you're very involved with the president. You're head of the pro-life group at the White House. Mm-hmm. What do you think this appointment is a bigger signal of?
This is just one outgrowth of a larger shift from Obama to Trump. Trump has completely embraced everything that Obama rejected. So all of the staffers that have been hired all along the way help propel that view. It's just, and Charmaine is one in a line of fantastic choices in this administration.
It seems to me that he is very much so proven he is committed to life. Can you give us some details as to how?
Yeah. Well, truly, if he's pro-choice, we need more pro-choice elected officials because he has done a tremendous job at promoting pro-life principles and following through on the commitments that he made during the election. He's smart. He understands politics. He understands the right thing to do. He really took those commitments and has immediately leveraged those into policy throughout the administration. But the most important piece would be Judge Gorsuch, because without that foundation at the Supreme Court, any of the other laws that we pass will be a moot point.
What about the HHS mandate and trying to reverse that? Where's that all going to play out?
Well, it's on track. It's slower than we want because why? 100 days has passed and so many things have happened that I think we've built up a expectation that everything's going to happen really quickly. Where the state in play is very positive, very good. There's a complete commitment on the part of the administration, the president, the vice president, on down, committed to making that happen. And clearly, Charmaine will have a role in making that happen as well.
Okay, fabulous. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Our news partner, National Catholic Register, has an in-depth story on pro-life Democrats vowing to continue the fight against their party's pro-abortion stance. You can read it now at ncregister.com. To mark the president's 100 days in office, our White House producer sat down with the chief White House photographer, who describes for us what it's like to be behind the scenes with the president in this exclusive interview.
My name is Shayla Craighead, and I'm the chief photographer at the White House. The day depends on the president's schedule. Sometimes he makes it into the Oval Office before I get up there, and sometimes I'm up there before he is, and so then I'll walk with him to sort of start the day. That's my job then, is to grab that photo. In between the signings and the official handshakes, to find the human side as well. This is the photograph of the president in the Red Room. He was actually the president-elect at that moment. I thought, whoa, this is such a quiet, powerful moment, and that's the moment where he was walking out to take his seat on the stage of the inauguration. This was the photo of Mrs. Trump, the president, and Barron walking and waving at the same time. You know, in all honesty, I just was hoping I got something. The president really likes this photo. He adores his wife and thinks that she just looks stunning, and every time he sees the photo, he just comments on how amazing she looks, and so that's been really nice to hear. This was the first trip to the Pentagon, and his expression's pretty stern. You know, what they had just started to discuss was not a smiling moment. The vice president and his wife are deeply religious and open with prayer. The president asked the vice president to lead the prayer. This group of people came together, held hands, and came in tight. I don't necessarily think that these are moments that are going to go out. I didn't have any expectations coming in. I'm excited to see what happens. I'm interested and excited to see what happens.
Shayla Craighead was tapped for the role as White House chief photographer just days before the inauguration. She shoots as many as 2,000 images every day, although only 5 or 6 of those are typically published. The First Lady has already asked for some to be framed for the official residence. And Prince William and his wife Kate release a new photo of their daughter, Princess Charlotte, before her 2nd birthday tomorrow. The picture, taken by her mum, Duchess of Cambridge, shows Charlotte on the grounds of the family's country home. Her older brother, Prince George, is 3 years old, plans to attend London's school in the fall. Up next, my trip to Iraq. Michigan's Father Gerald Goronsky tells me why he moved to Iraq to help Christians facing persecution.
It's hard to build a life in that kind of situation.
Your faculties, memory, intellect, and will are 3 gifts, 3 talents God has given us that we will have to give an account for. These are words of wisdom on this Monday from EWTN foundress, Mother Angelica. The new temporary head of the Knights of Malta religious order takes his oath of office. Fra Giacomo Dalla Torre was elected Saturday after the Grand Master stepped down at the Pope's request. Dalla Torre will lead the order as lieutenant as it undergoes a period of Vatican-mandated reform. The Knights of Malta will then elect a new Grand Master. The dispute started after the Knights' worldwide charity distributed condoms in Myanmar, a move that goes against church teaching. As part of our continuing series on Catholics in Iraq, we meet a Catholic priest from the Diocese of Lansing, Michigan. He convinced his bishop to send him to help persecuted Christians. He's one of the few American priests working in Kurdistan, in the north of the country, in the city of Erbil, where Catholics have fled from ISIS. Father Gerald Wawronski has made the plight of Christians in Iraq his life's mission. He first learned of their near extinction at the hands of ISIS from TV reports in his Michigan rectory. Father Gerald says he's here because of love.
Thank you. By coming here, I can show them that all around the world, people are watching, people are praying, and we care, and somebody cares enough to invest their own life in their lives.
Father Gerald has lived in the rectory at St. Joseph's Cathedral in Ankawa, this Catholic area of Erbil, for just 6 months.
This is my room. I have a particular devotion to Our Lady of Perpetual Help, actually. How are you guys?
He helps in the parish, a center of activity for Catholics. The 55-year-old Michigan native has come, he says, to give some hope and consolation to people weary of war.
Biggest problem is that Iraq has been at war for 40 years. I mean, it's a long time. And so society is all just torn up and disordered. It's hard to build a life in that kind of situation.
He spends his days teaching high school and seminarians and ministering to Latin Rite Catholics in Erbil. And though he doesn't speak Arabic or Aramaic, the local languages, he's making a dent.
Hope is essential to carry on with your life in spite of whatever might be looming even in the near future.
It's a calling Father Gerald is determined to answer, standing side by side with his Christian brethren, 6,000 miles from home. Throughout the coming weeks, we will continue to bring you stories of persecuted Christians and Catholics in Iraq, including those who are struggling to move home to towns left decimated by ISIS. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget you can watch all of our broadcasts on our YouTube channel. I'll see you again tomorrow. Good night and God bless.